wide, and they're into the stretch, and it's Tiz the Law on the outside of Authentic. These two stride for stride as they come to the final furlong. Authentic is dragging in. Tiz the Law all out to get by him. Authentic and John Velasquez have the lead as they come down to the 16th pole. Tiz the Law still trying to get him. Authentic, Tiz the Law, here's the wire. Authentic has won the Kentucky Derby.
All right, welcome back here on Racing Rundown after a very eventful running of the 2020 Kentucky Derby. Finally, it's here. Finally, it's over with, and we got a lot to unpack from this. We're recording this about an hour and a half after the finishing of the race, which was won by Authentic, trained by Bob Baffert. Gets a record-tying 6th Kentucky Derby win for trainer Bob Baffert. Obviously, a lot to unpack here. But before we get into that, we do just want to, briefly just say a quick thank you to the viewers. We hit 2,000 subscribers just a few hours ago, so really appreciate all the views for that. But getting into breaking down this Kentucky Derby, and, obviously going into it, both of us were super bullish on Authentic, and really, not only us, the majority of the industry was of the belief that Authentic was a horse that wanted no part of the mile and a quarter. And, obviously sitting here now, that wasn't the case. Authentic ran a great race, had a bit predicated at the start, recovered, and ran a freakishly good performance in the Kentucky Derby today.
Most definitely. I think I'm still trying to digest it. There's like Jack said, a lot to unpack from this race. Really, though, this race, obviously the horse has to get to the wire first. That's all on his talent. But John Velasquez did an excellent job here. They had this race mapped out to a T, and I imagine it worked out just the way they thought. Tiz the Law broke better. Authentic always breaks just a touch slow. That's kind of just been a thing for him. But Johnny V did a really good job not hustling him up, letting his horse naturally get into the race. And then throughout, obviously the fractions were quick, but Velasquez was able to slow it down each quarter. From the opening quarter to the opening half mile, it was slower. The opening half to the 3/4, even slower than that. So he really, while the numbers on paper, obviously with the chart and stuff and how it looked throughout the race, they weren't things you'd think would benefit the speed. They rationed it out very nicely, especially John Velasquez, obviously. And he ran very well. And, I've heard a couple of people mention track bias, and I don't think that's really the case. The horses that were 3rd, 4th, and 5th all came from well out of it. At the end of the day, it was just two horses, Authentic and Tiz the Law, that were superior on the day. And we're going to talk about it more, but, Tiz the Law had no excuses.
And that leads into, before we talk about Tiz the Law and everything, it leads into one point that I want to make. And this is just how, Authentic winning this Kentucky Derby. Well, I want to preface this. I'm not asterisking the Kentucky Derby. I'm not saying that Authentic wasn't the best horse on the day, because obviously you go watch the race, and Authentic obviously had to get through the whole mile and a quarter, had to overcome a bit of adversity at the start, but was able to recover that. And after that, like Eric mentioned, Johnny was able to slow it down. But, once he came to the stretch, Tiz the Law fought him, and Authentic was able to fight back and win the race. But the dynamic of this Kentucky Derby was completely changed, with two of the more prominent speed horses dropping out over the past couple of weeks, Art Collector and King Guillermo being both of those. We talked about this a little bit in our King Guillermo update about him scratching from the Kentucky Derby, and I said I believed Authentic was going to stick around longer than I initially would have believed he would have, but obviously neither of us foresaw Authentic running the race of his life and winning the Kentucky Derby due to the speed not being there. Obviously, you got to give the horse credit because he was still able to win the Kentucky Derby. He still had to go a mile and a quarter, which is something that we didn't think he was going to do. Ultimately, he did that. You got to give him the credit for being able to do that. But it definitely, a factor of this was the fact that a lot of the speed dropped out going into this Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, I totally agree. And realistically, and I'm not obviously saying it, I think everybody was kind of in the back of their minds like, oh, that is a little concerning. Authentic's going to have things go his way with all these scratches. And even, before the race, obviously, we haven't talked about the 1,000-word scratch. That was a big deal, and I think that even more so kind of changed how the race was going to play out. And, I think, though, at the end of the day, it was very impressive. We can't take it away from him. That's horse racing, right? But the changing of the race, and reality is, none of us, I don't think, I know he was 8-1. Obviously, there was going to be a lot of money on a horse that was coming off a Grade 1 win. like he did, but at the end of the day, I don't think many people really expected him to get this distance. And so I think it's just really, I mean, I'm still in shock, obviously, that he was able to make it happen, but you can't take anything away from him. He beat who he was facing, and he beat, I mean, Tiz the Law, who I still consider a freaky racehorse. I just think Authentic is very freaky as well.
And, that obviously does give a perfect opportunity to segue to Tiz the Law. Obviously, a lot of excuses are going to be made for him. Most people didn't expect what happened Tiz the Law coming to the stretch and getting in a battle with a horse and losing. If Tiz the Law was going to lose the Kentucky Derby, it seemed like maybe there would have been an excuse for him. There was no excuses for Tiz the Law in this Kentucky Derby. He had every opportunity in the stretch to run by. He just couldn't. He ran into a horse that, was just able to run better than him on this particular day.
100%, Jack. I really still can't believe it. But yeah, I think if there was one excuse, and it's very minor, it's hard to call it an excuse. He was wider for the majority of the race than Authentic, and he did take a couple knocks from New York traffic in both turns, but that's not enough to be a Derby winning loss, or to totally excuse the loss or say that he was still the best horse. Same could go, if Authentic had been backing up and finished second, you could easily make the case that his slightly slow, delayed break would have been his excuse. But he was able to overcome it. The best horses are able to overcome minor things like that and even major things. And I'm not obviously saying Tiz the Law is not a great horse, but while it was definitely weird to see him, struggling to do what we expected from him. I mean, he faced a horse he'd never faced before. I mean, he'd already beaten the majority of these Derby horses before, proving he was better. And Authentic at the end of the day just had a lot more than I expected, and I know you, Jack, expected, and really most of us did. That was just an incredible performance.
So now we're going to get into some of, I guess what you can call some of the surprises of this Kentucky Derby. Obviously, the win by Authentic is the biggest surprise, but some of the other horses that ran pretty well underneath. Obviously, Mr. Big News running third. I talked about how, every year I look for the big long shot that's going to run at 40 plus to 1, run in the money. That was Mr. Big News this year. Was not expecting him. I thought that there were horses that fit that bill better, but credit to Mr. Big News. He had the big race in the Oaklawn Stakes, and he had a fairly similar pace in this Kentucky Derby. Not really that a lot of the horses on the lead backed up, but he did have a fairly good pace to close into, and he was one of the few closers, and he wasn't really a deep closer. He was a lot closer than a lot of the other deep closers like your Honor APs and your Max players were. So, but really surprised to have gotten a third place effort from him. I would have pegged a few other long shot horses to run that kind of race before I would have pegged him.
Definitely. It was a surprise, and I know me personally and you, Jack, both, when he first came into the field, we're a little optimistic on him, but kind of analyzing it more, he made a little less sense, but it was a very good ride. I certainly think the distance was the biggest thing here. Obviously, he really relished it. Pedigree-wise, if you take one look at it, you realize that he has a lot of distance in his pedigree, and he benefited from it for sure. So he ran huge. I was, like I said, a surprise, but it was also just a smart ride. He wasn't dead last. He sat, back half of the field, but really you had your first 8 or so in the game, and then he was in that next group about, I'd say, 8 to 10 lengths from the lead. And it was a very good ride by Gabe Saez. It's certainly a very smart entry. It was a last-minute entry. Even the trainer, Brett Calhoun, didn't seem so confident in it, but it paid off. And then stormed the court. He ran 6th. Obviously, yeah, that's not going to win you a ton of money, but at the end, or if you're a better, no money for them. They get a small portion, but still to finish 6th in the Derby is pretty credible. I do think, though, at the end of the day, he was really benefited by being up front, because the horses that ran up front did overall finish very well. The horses, I'm pretty sure the last 4 or 5 were all very far back throughout the race. I think only Money Moves really was up in contention early on, so I think he benefited from the pace, but he ran his typical nowhere near making an impression, but still finishing decently kind of race we expect from him. But I have to give him credit. He ran 6th in the Derby.
And, usually in every Kentucky Derby, there's always the horse that is fairly highly regarded going into the Kentucky Derby that doesn't really have a favorable trip and kind of gets a little bit screwed, and you draw a line through the Kentucky Derby with that particular horse. You can point to a ton of examples from last year's Kentucky Derby for that. This year there wasn't really the case of anything like that super notable in this Kentucky Derby. Your horses that were, like I already mentioned, your horses that were in the back tended to stay there. You can talk a little bit about some of the stuff that happened at the start. I know that we're not super big into what happened with Honor AP at the starting gate, but I know that there are some people who believe that the episode that happened at the beginning of the race had something to do with it. But all in all, there wasn't really anything in this Kentucky Derby that kind of predicated a horse and prevented them from running their best race.
Not at all. Clean tricks throughout. Truly, I think watching it back a couple times, the only horse I think that could have had a better trip was Money Moves, but on talent, he wasn't going to be there. And as for Honor AP, maybe he took a slight bump from the gate, but so did Authentic. Tiz the Law and him both kind of, rubbed each other a little. Storm the Court, who ran sixth, he wasn't exactly super clean from the gate. So it's the Derby. Nobody breaks perfectly. I can name countless Derby winners that weren't super clean early on, from the gates in the first 100 yards or so, and still ran fine. He was just slow. Truly, at the beginning of the race, he had no intention to show anything. And you could tell Mike Smith was asking him for a little, put him up in the game, and he didn't want to be in the game. I know we called him a plotter earlier on, and I'm not going to call him, full-on plotter. He shows that typical no early speed, closing very well into the Derby late, picking up the minor pieces role that we see so many times from so many different horses. But at the end of the day, he was just not good on the day in terms of, he ran a fine race, running fourth at the Derby, full credit to him, but he was no better than Authentic, no better than Tiz the Law. Even then, I think horses like, if Max Player shows any more speed, he probably finishes better than him. Honor if he was just able to get first run and weave through traffic a little cleaner towards the end. But he really had no excuses. Max Player, I think a lot of people picked him, so I'll touch on him quickly. He ran fine, but he was really, while I know the fractions, like I said earlier, the fractions would indicate it would benefit closers, but truly, I think you would have been hard pressed to find a closer that was going to beat the top two on this day. They were just so strong, and even then, the horses that were following them did not really back up too much.
And I guess one other horse that we can discuss on that sort of disappointed in the Kentucky Derby was New York Traffic. Very highly regarded going in, had the 3 second-place finishes in the Greatest Stakes behind the 3 really good horses, including Authentic, who, I guess the Haskell validates Authentic a little bit, but New York Traffic sat the perfect trip and was pretty close to lead and didn't really stick around that much. And, his race was honestly, I guess, if you could point to one horse that disappointed from that top group of horses, then New York Traffic would be the one. Maybe it was just a case of he wasn't good enough to, run in the money or a top 5 kind of Kentucky Derby, but, that's beside the point. But looking ahead towards, later on in the year, obviously Authentic, us coming out of the Kentucky Derby, if you asked us a week ago to think what Authentic would have been doing, we probably would have been saying, he's going to go for a Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, but he'll assumingly maybe go on to the Preakness, who knows. It's looking like Tiz the Law is going to take a pass on the Preakness and go to the Jockey Club Gold Cup, but aside from that, it looks to be a really interesting Preakness Stakes with some of the defectors from the Kentucky Derby and some interesting news shooters coming up.
Certainly. I'm very excited, and even before the Derby, I know me and Jack talked about it just a little, not a ton, but my point being, I think that the Preakness is going to be more fun of a race. Even before, I was banking on Tiz the Law winning, but now that he didn't win, the Preakness becomes all that more exciting. If Authentic runs, which I imagine Baffert will do, Baffert's never lost with a Derby winner at Pimlico, so that's one thing to consider. But these new shooters, Pneumatic, I think he would have factored in this Derby. The Jim Dandy earlier today was a little weird. But Mystic Guide, he was a horse that's kind of been, waiting in the wings, I guess, to really show what he really has. I know when he broke his maiden, he was really hyped up, but he really seemed to figure it out today in the Jim Dandy. So he's one. Jesus' team ran really good in there. I imagine they'll supplement him for that race. And we saw the Pat Day Mile today. We saw, Rushy do his thing, and I think they should definitely, after watching the Derby, while it was a very strong race, Rushy, to me, it seemed like he ran good enough to maybe take a shot at Pimlico. So, those are just a couple names. We really don't know at this point. This is unprecedented, a Preakness this far out with so many different races to prep for. And even Monday, the Tessio Stakes at Laurel will give us an even better indication. So it's going to be fun, though. This next month, really, I think that the Preakness is going to be the most fun race of this Triple Crown, as long as everybody gets there that we think is going to go there right now. And should be a fun, albeit weird. Certainly a Preakness in October is even weirder, I think, than a Derby in September. It's basically a Breeders' Cup prep, but it's going to be fun when we get there, and I'm very excited for it.
So obviously, once again, that's it for this video. Thank you for stopping by. Once again, thank you for 2,000 subscribers. We really appreciate that. We will see you later on for more podcast. At episode number 77, we'll recap the entire Kentucky Derby card. And we will see you later on this weekend for some 2-year-old previews, and we'll see you for more stuff later on. So have a good one. Hope you enjoyed the Derby, and have a good rest of your weekend.